Welcome to Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries. I'm Julie Cooper, a thriller writer and half of the duo bringing you this regular podcast series focused on mystery, suspense, and thriller fiction. Wendy and I are, dare I say, thrilled to have a thriller writer joining us today. But first, thanks to my brother Chris Squires for our theme song, The Man in the Panama Hat. And before we get started, a quick update on an author we interviewed late last year, Kelly Garrett. She just let me know that she's a Barry Award nominee for Best Paperback Original and also a 2018 Lefty Awards nominee for Best Debut Mystery Novel. And she's busy working on book number 3 in her Hollywood Homicide series. So more to come. Since we'll be talking about thriller fiction, it seems very appropriate to use adventure as our theme for this episode. I think it's one of the many essential qualities writers need to produce good fiction. While adventure may mean taking a walk on the wild side, a sense of adventure is vital to both writer and reader, even if it only means reading something completely outside your comfort level. For many readers, entering into the world of thriller fiction, in particular, can be shocking, thrilling, or disturbing, taking us into places, situations, and events we'd never normally experience. Hopefully, that's why a reader chooses a thriller, to be thrilled and to learn something about the wider world. Speaking of worlds most of us know nothing about, I'm excited to introduce writer K.J. Howe, author of The Freedom Broker, about the international enterprise of kidnap and ransom specialists. Her follow-up thriller is called Skyjack, coming in April of 2018. Welcome, Kimberly.
It's fantastic to join you two tonight, and I'm all about adventure, so I can't wait to dive in.
Great.
Well, welcome, KJ. Talk about ripped from the headlines. After reading your book about kidnaps and ransoms, I saw that your interest had been sparked after you met Peter Moore, a British computer consultant. He became the longest held hostage in Iraq and the only one of 5 men taken that day who came home alive. What was it in that meeting that gave you the initial spark that you wanted to write a book about kidnap and ransom?
It's a great question, Wendy. Basically, I would say that it was the human, the power of the human spirit that inspired me to write about kidnap and ransom. Peter Moore was a hostage for about 1,000 days. And for the first 6 months, he was blindfolded and handcuffed. And the only way he got through that time was to kill mosquitoes with his cuffed hands and count how many he could get a day and build on his record so that he could keep his mind and his body engaged in something. And then when he finally had the blindfold off, he studied the cracks in the wall. And in his mind, he designed an entire train system that he was able to replicate on paper when he came back home. So it's really, when you're a hostage, it's so important that you keep your mind and body and spirit active. And I found that really fascinating. It would be a very worthwhile thing to basically investigate.
What an incredible amount of personal courage. That really touches the heart.
Yeah, I feel very honored to know Peter and to become friends with him. And it's fascinating. He had such an eclectic and challenging childhood. And it was almost like, he was abandoned by his mom at 12 years old, and he lived with his stepdad, and then he was involved with the Scouts. And so I think basically what he did was, his whole life, without him realizing, was kidnapping training. Wow. So he could be successful. He was there.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. And he's doing much better now, I'm hoping.
Peter is actually an incredible person. He is going to talk to different groups like journalists and military to try and share with them what it was like to be a captain, so he can better prepare people, first of all, to prevent the kidnappings, and second of all, if something does happen and they're taken, how to best survive the kidnapping. So he's a very, very heroic character.
Wow, very giving. Well, in The Freedom Broker, your first book, a proud Greek billionaire family is the primary protagonist and victim. There's adult siblings, Thea and her brother Nikos, and then their father Christos. Their mother was killed in a boating accident years ago. Thea is deeply affected by Nico's abduction when he was 12. I encourage our listeners to visit your website, kjhowe.com, kjhowe.com. I love that your bio is there, as well as Theo's bio or biography. And they're quite different. What do you like best about Thea? And could the two of you be friends in real life?
Well, for sure, because Thea would be a great friend to have, especially if you're in trouble.
That's
but,
right.
So
sure.
true.
It's always good to have a kidnap negotiator on speed dial.
Yes.
Actually, it's kind of interesting because, it's been an education for me, to learn about this in industry in this area, and made so many nice friends. And I feel like my life has actually been changed by meeting people like Thea. Thea is a lot braver, of course, than I am because, she goes into these hot zones constantly. And basically what these kidnap negotiators do is they travel with their go bag undercover and they go to these foreign countries. And they meet with the hostage's family or business, associates, and they sort of basically come up with a plan on how to negotiate for the release of the hostage. I think that, Thea is incredibly brave to be able to do this. And, we have some similarities as well because I grew up, my father worked in telecommunications. So I lived in Africa, Puerto Rico, Saudi Arabia, all over the world. And Thea also had a similar upbringing. So I think kind of being a child of the world is something we'd have in common. And, she's a big tennis player like I am and loves to swim. So, I think we've got a lot in common, but she's definitely, speaks a few more languages than I do and certainly a lot more well-traveled now.
Well, your Gabrielle character, she's an ex-CIA U.S. government agent who's a super sharpshooter. At first, she reminded me a little bit of that suspicious cliche, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. And I think that I felt like Thea also had some distrust of her in the beginning. But in some ways, they're much the same. At one point, Gabrielle realizes about herself that, and I'm quoting here, she loved working in the field and hadn't had a taste of it in far too long. That's the end of the quote, and that is adventurous. What I noticed she has in common with Thea is that they both keep their emotions so restrained and contained. Why is that important for these characters not to dwell on their feelings?
Well, I think that when people are under enormous duress and in life and death situations, it's very important not to be guided by your emotions, but to be guided by your mind and your thoughts and trying to process things, especially when it's in a heat of a negotiation going back and forth. That's very tight and you have to stay completely focused. Now, I really definitely feel that there's a lot of undercurrents in their feelings. They're strong women with passionate, interests. And I think after the situation has gone down, they probably do a lot of decompression. A good example for this is when I talk to a lot of the freedom brokers or kidnap negotiators that I'm friends with now, they tell me that quite often, they have to go 24/7 for like 2 to 3 weeks at a time. And with the hostage's family, the intensity of the emotions, life and death decisions, to the point when they, on the flight on the way back and they had a successful result, they often dissolve into tears on the plane because of exhaustion, because of repression. And I really wanted to represent that accurately in my fiction because the one thing I'm trying very hard to do is to show an authentic portrayal of these kidnap negotiators. And so I wanted to show, how they do have to tamp down their emotions while they're in the field. But keep in mind that they do release them. And most of these kidnap negotiators actually have families and are like soccer mom and dads. And so when they come home, they can actually be themselves.
Wow. That's just so incredible. Yeah. It's amazing as you're reading through the book, thinking about these. It's fiction in the book, but there are these people. It's incredible. KJ, I have to confess, I love Riff.
That makes me very happy because he's kind of my fantasy man too.
He is Christo's godson, and he's very loyal to the family. At one point, Riff is described, quote, when they were children, he had been an adventurous, rambunctious boy, exploring the outdoors, hiking and fishing wherever he could. That carefree side of him had been extinguished by his experience in Chad, and a darkness seemed to ride his shoulders now, unquote. And by the way, wow, what a great way to describe a character. It's just an awesome quote. Could you talk a little bit about Riff, just because I love hearing about him?
Sure. And, it's really fun to have a little bit of interplay. I obviously wrote a thriller, but I feel that every book benefits from a little bit of sexual tension, romance, just gives a little different dimension. And I'm a big believer in that. And as I mentioned, Riff is a bit of a fantasy man for myself as well. So I'm very pleased to hear you liked what I designed. Riff is a Delta Force guy. And, I love the fact that, Thea and Riff have known each other since they were kids. And they've always kind of been like, brother and sister more like. But things have changed lately. And they're starting to notice each other, in a different way. And Riff is a very, intense soldier. Without doing any spoilers, he had a very tragic situation happen to him in Chad. And I wanted to explore what it's like, to be a soldier, to live through that. So many people are out there in the military and dealing with, very, very tough situations. And then they come back and struggle sometimes to adapt and adjust to what we call normal civilian life. And so I felt like that was something important to explore. A lot of my information in my book is really trying to bring an authentic portrayal of each and every character and what they go through. And even though it's a thriller, I really like to dive deep into the emotions of my characters.
Beautiful. Can you comment on the challenges with pacing when you're writing a contemporary thriller story? I mean, like with the impact of modern electronics, communications, tracking devices, and so on. What do you have to deal with the pacing of the story?
Well, I love writing fast-paced fiction because I have a short attention span myself, so I'm always trying to do something different and do some twists and turns. And I feel like, when you're writing it, if you're keeping interested, hopefully the reader is too. And I try to use modern electronics and communications and tracking devices and such, as you mentioned, as like something that can go wrong. That's how you can have some fun, right? We all benefit, from all these, like you said, back in the day when we didn't have cell phones, it was a lot easier to be kind of in peril, right? Because you can't call help. But for example, my next book, Skyjack, it's quite possible, to turn off a transponder on a plane, to block sat phones, to block Wi-Fi. And so all this stuff happens in that book. And just to show you the impact of modern electronics is fine, but let's face it, when things go wrong, they can go very wrong.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Good point.
The billionaire father that's in the Freedom Broker, Christos Paris, is very concerned with how the public thinks of him. And he actually has hired a PR firm to manage his image. He's paying for a public persona. But actually, there's other characters in the book, too, that are sort of managing themselves how they appear to others, which makes, to tell you the truth, it makes a suspect-rich environment for us readers, which is fantastic. One character notes that, quoting, people believe what they want to hear most of all, end of quote. What are the challenges writing characters that are consciously hiding secrets?
Well, I'm a big believer as a writer that every single character should have a secret because it makes the book so much more interesting. And what I find fun to do is, I love multiple point of view. Some people love first person, but I, as a thriller author, love multiple points of view because you can leave off on one character's viewpoint at cliffhanger, head to another's. And also what you can do with that is you can give the reader information that the characters don't have. And by doing that, you make them worry. You make them, say, okay, I know this so-and-so about this, but how is, Thea going to find this out? And I think that it just creates inherent tension. And I think, it also relates to us as humans. We all walk around with secrets, right?
Yeah.
Always said, we don't want other people to know. And they could be very benign secrets, or they could be serious secrets. And I love exploring that within characters. I love psychology. It's a passion of mine. And I try and study it, personality disorders, different mental illnesses. And I'm trying to integrate that information into the books because I find it fascinating. Because what is normal? There is no normal anymore, is there?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Well, your characters are amazing. I mean, I'm really into all of them, but, well, especially Riff. But anyways.
And that's all there is to it.
A beautiful setting can suddenly turn and increase the danger of a situation. And you do that so artfully, whether the scene is a city neighborhood or a jungle or the ocean or a desert. What inspired you to make beautiful environments part of the conflict for your characters?
Well, I'm a real traveler, and I hope, like I mentioned earlier, all my life I've been living in different places. And I guess it's my mindset too, which is, I don't know what it says about myself, but I'm always looking at things and seeing the dark side of things, right? You see a beautiful, like you said, jungle, and you think what's happening behind those, leaves and and in the ocean, and what can go wrong underwater and such. But I think that I also really feel like my books, I'm hoping anyways, they're always going to be international. They're going to be set in different places all over the world. I try and visit every location I possibly can because I really want to bring, the essence and the senses of exactly what's happening in that place. And my goal is to, if you've never been to this environment, let's say you've never been to Santorini, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world, I want you to be enticed to perhaps, take your next vacation there. And if you have been there, I really want to bring back fond memories by reminding you of the sights and sounds and feels of that place. And also, I feel like, anything can turn dangerous if you've got that thriller mindset. And I love exploring how things that are so beautiful can be so dangerous.
Wow. Well, it's what you said about all the different senses, you really do that in that book. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, when I'm reading those settings, I feel like I'm there, even though it's someplace I've never been. But you really engage all my senses in that.
Thank you.
Love that. Well, I wanted to thank you, Kimberly, so much for this little excerpt that I want to read about Thea from your wonderful book, The Freedom Broker. So here's my excerpt. She dropped the phone back into her purse and slung the strap across her body to free her hands. Instinctively, she and Riff positioned themselves back to back. She slipped off her Louis Vuittons and kicked them aside. And then it goes on into this fantastic street fight. So readers, you got to get to this part. But I just want to tell you, as a purse lover, this natural motion with the purse and the detail when they're surprise attacked by these four mysterious figures in the alley, it just feels so good in a thriller. I loved it.
Well, thank you.
So human.
Well, I'm a big purse girl and shoes too, and I think every girl needs a pair of killer heels, don't you think?
I definitely do. Yes.
We do. Yes.
Love that. Well, now that I've read my favorite little excerpt, I was hoping that you would please honor us by reading a passage of your choosing from The Freedom Broker for our listeners.
I'd be delighted to do so. And I think what it would be helpful is I'm going to read from the chapter 2, where Thea is, she has many different roles in her job. One of which, of course, is tactical. She goes out sometimes to rescue hostages. Other is she negotiates with kidnappers to bring hostages back home. And part of her job, though, is to make the world a safer place. And that's what I'm trying to do in some ways with my books, is to educate readers and explain, how you can travel with safer. I do a lot of talks on travel safety when I go around. And so I just wanted to give a little snapshot of information in chapter 2. So this is
Great.
set in Quantum International Security Headquarters in London, England. Okay. Thea studied the physicians gathered around the conference room table for their pre-travel briefing. If she could prevent just one kidnapping through these educational sessions, then the effort was worthwhile. Every group was different, but she always tried to predict which individuals would fare best if they were kidnapped and tailor the talk to those who probably wouldn't cope as well. She'd been a response consultant, the industry term for kidnap negotiator, for 7 years, long enough to understand how different personalities dealt with captivity. She smiled at the doctors who were heading to Cusilan, the narco crime capital in Sinaloa, Mexico, for relief work. Let's talk a little physiology, which should be right up your alley. Ordinarily, if you're confronted with a traumatic or threatening situation, your hypothalamus triggers a fight or flight reflex, which propels your body into a state of hyper-alertness, right? Blood surges to your extremities to prime the muscles for action. This makes you want to battle or bolt. But in a kidnapping, either of those actions could be counterproductive and potentially deadly. And updated research includes a third reaction, which is freezing. Also not good. The doc in the Zegna suit admired his manicured nails, emanating superiority and boredom. But was that mere bravado, masking fear? Likely. He'd certainly make a perfect target. And the Mexican kidnappers would instantly deflate his overpuffed ego with the custom welcome battering they deployed to dominate hostages. Strip this guy of his Rolex and other trappings of wealth, and he'd be huddled in a fetal position, begging to go home. People with a titanium core, not a cream puff center like his, were the ones who survived without permanent damage. When you're captive, you're stuck in an anxiety-ridden purgatory that might last hours, days, months, or even years, with no control over your fate. To survive unbroken, you need to override the fight-or-flight reflex and avoid freezing. Instead, you must summon up survival qualities like patience, optimism, and discipline. Thea indicated a fit middle-aged woman who sat near the front, her name written on her binder. For example, Annie here would probably weather captivity well. She chooses sensible shoes over stilettos, which demonstrates practicality. And judging by the crossword puzzle book tucked into her briefcase, she has the required mindfulness and patience needed to endure both boredom and apprehension. Annie gave her a small smile. But I hope none of you will have to find out how you cope. We're here today to minimize your risk of being kidnapped. She paced the boardroom. Most abductions take place on weekday mornings, and 78% of them occur within 200 meters of the hostage's home or workplace. How can you protect yourself? Become a hard target. But what does that mean in practical terms? Don't take the same route to work every day. Maintain an unpredictable schedule, and always be aware of your surroundings. Remain alert and attentive. No talking or texting on the phone while in public. Instead, make careful note of any suspicious vehicles or individuals lingering around. A man with a large handlebar mustache raised his hand. If someone tries to abduct me, how hard do I fight back? And to get the rest of that information, you'll have to read the book.
That is great. That's great.
So good.
That was a good excerpt to choose. Yeah.
And I think, KJ, you just nailed his character so well, the very arrogant doctor in the $3,000 suit. It's just so perfect.
We've all met those type of fellows, right?
Oh, yes. And some of us have even worked with those fellows. So.
No. Well,
I've met women like that too.
Well, that's true. Very true. And if you ever need anyone kidnapped, you've got all the how-to now in the book.
Right. Very helpful. Well, KJ, I found your book fascinating, and the kidnap and ransom business that you write about is a real thing. It's not fiction. Can you tell us just a little bit more about the hostage recovery industry and who uses these specialists?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to do so. It's become a real passion. I've studied kidnap and ransom now for 5 years, and I've just immersed myself in this world because it was very important to me. As a former medical writer, I'm big into research, and I really wanted to get the facts correct and to bring authenticity to make the books hopefully entertaining, but educational as well, because I really feel like, I don't know you guys, but when I read a book, I love being entertained, but also learning. And I want, share, I want you to be able to put the book down and think, wow, okay, I learned something today. That's good. And so this industry is sadly, it's incredibly a poor situation internationally because kidnapping is on the rise. And the reason for that is there's many reasons. Criminal gangs are doing quick snatch and grabs as a way of making, a fast dollar. For example, express kidnappings. When they take someone to an ATM at 11:45, they get them to withdraw their full amount for that day. They keep them at 12:02, have them, withdraw the full amount for the second day, and then hopefully let them go.
Wow.
There's also, it's become a real thing for tourism in places like Mexico. That tourists, they just grab them because they know that they have a pretty large, cash advance per day.
Right.
So that's a real issue. And then also terrorists are not only using kidnapping as a propaganda mechanism, as you see those sad videos with journalists, being beheaded, and also they use it as a fundraising mechanism. So there's some hostages they keep and hold and use for ransom so that they can, fill their terror coffers. And as well, in a lot of developing countries out there, it's really sad because the military and police are displaced. They have no jobs, no way of putting food on the table for their families. So they turn to kidnapping as basically a way of going to work every day, a job.
And
a
growth industry.
It truly is. And the sad part about this, guys, is that we don't really have a big problem with kidnapping in the U.S. and Canada because we have prosecution, very, very strict laws and severe penalties. But in Mexico, you have a 95% chance of getting away with kidnapping. Why wouldn't you do it? Terrible, right?
It makes you stop and think. It really does, about visiting certain places in the world.
Well, I have a map on my website. You probably saw it, that is basically shows the different hot zones. So before you're planning your next vacation, you might want to take a look at that and just make sure you're not going anywhere that's dangerous.
Yeah, actually, that map is really fascinating, and there's some surprises on that map. At least there were for me.
Did anything in particular stand out, or were you surprised with the Philippines?
That was definitely one, yes.
I know, and even Aruba is a very high, incident of kidnapping there because it's very close to South America. There's a lot of millionaires who vacation there and, on the beach, and so prime kidnapping territory.
Interesting. Well, speaking of kidnap and ransom, how difficult was it to do the research on these K&R operators? And are any of the characters in your book at all based on real people?
Yeah, well, as I said, because I'm a huge researcher, what I did was I Googled kidnap and ransom conference. And believe it or not, there is one.
Oh.
And so I attended it. And, I had no idea, didn't know a soul. But I went there because I thought I really want the authenticity here. And the only way I'm going to get it is to meet these people. I was very, very overjoyed by the reception I received. I was worried, I could have been shunned because it's a very dark industry. It's a very secretive industry. But I think part of it helped that I wasn't a journalist. I did not want to report on any current cases. I didn't want to try and expose something that was private. All I wanted to do was immerse myself in their world and to become familiar with what they do. And in some ways, I think being a woman helped as well, because I wasn't a macho guy coming in there going, hey, buddy, tell me about your work. It was more just, a real genuine interest and trying to be professional. And I think they could see that I had done my homework before I went, that I had learned every single thing I could before I arrived. And so I just, I went and I took them to the bar, which is always a great place to get people chatting. And then,
very true.
And then we'd talk, and I think that they could see that I really wanted, the truth. I wanted to hear their stories, and I wanted to represent them in the best way possible. And are the characters based on real people? I would say like a mix of this and that, but not specifically. I definitely use a lot of the same traits. Like, for example, one of my main experts is a fabulous guy named Dr. Frank Grimm. And his background's in the Defense Intelligence Agency. So I made that be his background to have a similitude, So things like that, but nothing real because, you don't ever want to, hijack people's identities. And I love making up characters. That's half the fun.
It is half the fun, truly. Absolutely. Now, there was a statistic in your book which I just about, sat there with my mouth open and almost put the book down for a moment because it shocked me so much. You said over 40,000 people are kidnapped every year. And it seems that most of the K&R cases the public hears about concern high-profile journalists or wealthy individuals. But I'm really wondering what happens when an average person like a professor or an aid worker gets taken.
Well, it's a great question, Julie, because it used to be that high net worth individuals and executives, foreign people overseas were basically the only people who are kidnapped. And journalists, aid workers, and missionaries, people like that were untouched. But things have completely changed. Now, every single Westerner basically is a target. They feel that we're very wealthy. And like you said, sometimes it can be for propaganda purposes, not necessarily ransom. And it really changes.
Right.
So, I mean, we're constantly hearing in the news now about people like NGOs, right, being kidnapped, aid workers.
Yes.
And so what happens is the company that the person's working for has insurance on them, K&R insurance, specialized insurance you can buy through certain carriers. And what's fascinating, usually insurance is kind of a boring topic, but I think K&R insurance is fascinating because if the person traveling knows that they have insurance or how much insurance they have, the insurance could potentially be null and void. Because picture this person's taken and tortured, and they know they're worth like $1 million. So they cough up that number, and the kidnappers now know what to ask for.
I see.
And just to further, answer your question about what happens when an average person like Professor Award get taken, everyone is treated, very seriously. And when Obama was in power, there was so much flack from the journalists like James Foley and Stephen Sotoloff and what had happened with their families. They basically, sometimes the left hand of the government didn't know what the right hand was doing. So Obama created something called the HRFC, and it's the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell. And it is basically spearheaded by the FBI, but it's a multi-agency group. It's got the State Department, CIA, FBI. And so what happens is when anything happens overseas for Americans, if they're kidnapped, bottom line is the HFC is notified and everything goes through them so that it's one central depot for information. Yeah, it's really good. I think it's much better that they have this now.
Yeah.
And if you don't
I think so too.
Right? If you don't have insurance, it's trickier because your family is often mortgaging their home to try and pay the ransom. It's a very, very difficult thing.
I just can't even imagine what some of those families have gone through. It's horrific, truly.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that the kidnappers take a hostage, but they truly hold, the families hostage as well. Because how can you sleep at night knowing your loved one is not safe?
Right. Exactly. That's exactly it. Well, speaking of people, you've created a very unique female protagonist, Thea Paris. She doesn't just show up at the hostage negotiations table, but she goes out and she puts her life on the line to recover someone who's been taken. It's great to see a female protagonist calling the shots, literally. I'm wondering, how much grief did you get for making your thriller's lead character a woman in what I'm guessing many would still say is a man's world even now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I had no doubt in my mind that I was going to create like an alpha female, a strong female.
Yes.
That was my goal. And even though it is challenging sometimes, even publishers, I think sometimes were like, will this sell? Will people be interested? And I totally think women today are completely looking for these type of characters. I'm hoping young girls will see Thea Paris and think, I can do anything. Don't let anything stop me, right? And, there are some gentlemen, who may not be keen on reading about a female protagonist, but I've had countless special forces guys read my books, and they all say how much they've enjoyed it, and they feel like the authenticity on the fights and the gunplay and everything is so there that they don't even think about the fact that I'm a woman writing about a woman. They just think it's a good story that's well researched.
Perfect. That's what you want. Now, Thea Paris, on the surface, seems to have it all together. A challenging job, youth, jet-set wealth from her family, her father, physical attractiveness, some serious tactical skills, and yet she's got one liability. She's a type 1 diabetic. I know that you did a lot of research into this disease, so I'm wondering, how will this physical trait shape her throughout the series?
Well, yeah, I'm a former medical writer, as I said earlier, so I did a lot of articles on diabetes, and my grandfather had diabetes, and autoimmune issues run in our family. And I felt it was really important, to create a character, a strong female, but with somebody with, some vulnerability. And I wanted Thea not to be a comic book character like, Wonder Woman, which is fantastic, but there aren't any weaknesses. I wanted to make her
Exactly.
Very human person. I find that's much more relatable. So and also wanted to show to everyone out there, there's so many people with diabetes. There's 371 million people in the world who have diabetes. And if they have diabetes or any other illness, I don't want them to let it hold them back. I want them to go for their goals, reach for their dreams. And how will this physical shape her throughout the series? Well, I'm planning on each and every book showcasing a different aspect of diabetes, which I hope will be interesting to the reader, and also educate people about diabetes, because there's a lot of fallacies out there, right?
Sure.
Do you eat too much sugar? Is that why you got diabetes? Things like that. And I would love to dispel that and to bring reality into it. And I also feel that it's a very challenging illness. It's really quite powerful, and it's the perfect situation really for a thriller novel, because there's always this ticking time bomb with Thea needing insulin. And if she doesn't get her insulin, she...
Absolutely, yes.
So it's one of those things where I just felt... And also, she travels to all these crazy places. And I don't know if you know that some places in the world, you can't even get insulin, or you certainly can't get the type you're used to.
I had heard that, and I know certain types, have to be refrigerated, and then in certainly third world situations, you wonder, well, how well has it been refrigerated? And, it makes you stop and think about all these places that she's jetting off to and the risks that she's taking to pursue what she loves to do. So,
yeah, and I also have, designed like a special cooling pouch for her so that she can have that with her wherever she travels. And she's on an insulin pump, but I also have syringes filled with insulin, because sometimes pens and pumps can malfunction. So you basically want that insulin ready in the most simple form if you need it.
Right. And I thought details like that were really, really fascinating. Well, we've learned a lot of new things in your first book, including a little bit about how secretive the world of hostage recovery is and how it works, and also how to crack a hotel room safe. I may try that out on my next vacation, because I always thought those things were, safe. Oops. So tell us what's next for Thea Paris.
Yeah, I know. I love discovering little things like how to pick a lock, or how to undo handcuffs, or how to break into a safe, and including in the books. The scary part is when you do travel, be careful, because there are times where people have put dusting powder on the keypads before you check in, and then you press them and they know the numbers that you're using. There's so many different ways of doing that, right? And it's just scary. So next, for Thea Paris, as you guys well know, because it just landed, Skyjack will be coming out in April. And
yes,
I have done my homework from a plane perspective. So you're going to learn a whole bunch of really cool information about how to stay safe while flying. A fun read, hopefully. And, for example, one of the things I thought was fascinating, where do you guys think the safest place on a plane is to sit?
I'm thinking...
I've heard over the wing, but I don't know that I agree with that.
Next to the exit door.
Oh, that's always smart, right? I'm out first. Statistically,
right,
like in all the airplane crashes they do, studies and such, the experts have discovered that the rear of the plane is the safest place to sit when it comes to any aircraft, accidents and issues like that. The second most safe is over the wings. And then the least safe, ironically, is first class. So those people paying for the champagne, they're in serious trouble.
Whoa.
Ah.
I'm
So
glad.
like,
I'm glad I can't afford that.
Well, a couple more questions for you, Kimberly. I know you're very active in a writers group called Rogue Women Writers, and joined by one of my mentors, Gail Linz. Can you tell us more about this cabal of thriller writers, or is it a deep, dark secret?
That's nice. You know what? Gail Linz is amazing. She's a trailblazer and, a woman I deeply respect. I love what she's written about, and she's really making a difference for other women coming behind her. We have 8 ladies who all write international intrigue. And we bonded together to get the word out there that, females, like we talked about earlier, can really write great, international suspense. And I'm hoping that we're going to make a difference. We have a lovely following. And if you visit us at roguewomenwriters.com, you can read all our different blogs. We have special guests on all the time. And, it's going to be a great group. We tend to do panels at places like Thriller Fest and in other, industry events. And I'm hoping that it'll just help us bond together and get the word out.
Oh, I think so. It's one of my favorite places to look for more information on international thrillers. Well, speaking of thrillers, any advice for one of our listeners who think they might want to try to write a thriller? What would you advise as a good place to start?
Well, I would advise, as the executive director of Thriller Fest, to come join us there because we have a great conference every year. Just in case people want to know, we support thriller writers all over the world. And if you want information, you go to thrillerfest.com. But from a practical level, I would say read intensively, study the genre, see what's out there, and ask yourself what you can do that's not already done. And that's one of the things I did, when I was approaching, I knew I wanted to write a thriller for sure. I knew I wanted it to be international. And kidnapping fascinated me because, there's so much murder in crime fiction, but there's not as much, with respect to like an elite kidnap negotiator, someone who travels all over the world. And I sort of see that interesting because kidnapping is a purgatory. So I would just say that ask yourself what's not being done to death, what's fresh, what's different, because that's what the editor is looking for. It's very difficult to follow trends, I think, in genre. For example, there was this big trend for vampire books. And then that by the time you jump on the bandwagon, you write a book which takes a year, you another year for production, that's 2 years later, and that's on a fast track. You may have missed the trend, right? So don't write for trend, write from your heart. What do you love to write?
Very, very good advice. And we're going to launch into some short segments. Mine I'm calling You Are What You Read, and I'm encouraging listeners to actively search out good books. Maybe start out the second month of this new year with a list of must-read books for 2018, including some in categories you've never read before. There's that sense of adventure. By that, I mean finding the best quality books in your favorite or a new genre, whether it's thriller, mystery, biography, sci-fi, or historical fiction. Software programmers and code writers have an expression, garbage in, garbage out. I'm urging you to find the best reads you can to fill your brain. Learn something while you're reading, as Kimberly said. So how do you do that? Here's a few places to start. If you're into mysteries, check out recent award winners under the Edgar, Anthony, and McCavity Awards programs. If you love thrillers, like I do, and you want to find a new series, go to the ITW website, thrillerwriters.org, and explore the author profiles and features on new books. If historical fiction and literary fiction is your cup of tea, search under National Book Awards. If you're drawn to more diverse international authors who write literary fiction, check out the Man Booker Prize nominees. There's an option out there for nearly every kind of reader. And of course, go into your local independent or chain bookstore and ask for bookseller recommendations. These people love books and they love to give you some good choices. Or ask your local librarian. They're a terrific source of information. One related thought in closing, a statement repeated by so many successful writers that we've interviewed on this podcast. If you want to write well, you must read well, and that means reading with discernment. Your next great read is waiting for you.
Thanks, Julie. I have my next great read sitting right here next to me. It's called Skyjack, and it is by KJ Howe.
Excellent.
I hope you enjoy it.
And as soon as you finish it, Wendy, I want it.
That's right. Well, today I wanted to talk about C.S. Lewis and William Shatner. C.S. Lewis wrote more than 30 books, including the well-known Chronicles of Narnia. One of his quotes, just as a person, is, "When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up." He also said, "You're never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream." I think the antithesis of adventure is fear. There are the instinctual fears that we have, and then there are the learned fears. We learn through experiences that don't go well. Once bit, twice shy. But what we should strive for is to learn from our experiences so that we can adventure more. Adventure brightens the soul. Sometimes adventure is difficult. If you focus on what you might risk and lose, that's the learned fear. Get yourself to focus on not adventure. And with not adventure, what are you risking then? And what have you lost by not going on an adventure? Then my advice is go adventure every day, big or small adventure. And every day take time to celebrate your own adventurous spirit. I have to admit, I like C.S. Lewis, but I relate in my own adult life philosophy as part of the Shatner universe. That's William Shatner. And his Shatner Rules book, Your Guide to Understanding the Shatnerverse and the World at Large. Here's my favorite part of his advice. Say yes. Yes means opportunity. Yes makes the dots in your life appear. And if you're willing and open, you can connect those dots. You don't know where those dots are going to lead. And if you don't invest yourself fully, then the dots won't connect. The lives you make with those dots always lead to interesting places. No closes doors. Yes kicks them wide open. As long as you're able to say yes, the opportunities keep coming, and with them, the adventures. Say no to fear and complacency. Keep saying yes, and then the journey will continue. All right, and then I have my recommendation in addition to our guest books. My recommendation today is a book called The Republic of Thieves by Scott Lynch. Herein is an epic adventure story. It begins curiously as a narrative like Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, with an orphan gang and the Fagin type of character. It develops into parallel plot lines that tell in alternating chapters about the few main characters' childhoods and their adult magical adventures. Yes, it's magical adventures. This fantasy novel uses supernatural phenomena and ominous characters to drive the plot in the mystery. Beyond the intriguing fantasy elements, you're drawn to these innocent rogues who survive on their wits and naturally get bound together. The author skillfully sculpts the characters and artistically reveals at a leisurely pace how they mature. It's so interesting that as you read the adult adventures at the same time that you read about the childhood adventures, as if almost as if you're reading two separate books, yet the two books are one. In alternating chapters, you see naturally how these adults develop the strengths and weaknesses, the traits and personal philosophies, the loyalties and motivations during their childhoods. These adventures are complete with tangled love stories. True loves are also a driving force in this epic. I tremendously enjoyed the author's subtle sense of humor and excellent dialogue. Scott Lynch writes a most creative mystery and knows how to throw the most obstacles directly in his characters' paths. You'll often find yourself asking, how in the world will they get out of this one? You'll savor the discovery of each resolution before being thrust forward into the next hurdle. This book is the third in Scott Lynch's series about this gang. It was over 5 years in the writing. The author has said about the series that he hopes that people realize that he's structuring it and playing it in a very long game. In an interview, he elaborated, "The thing is, I typically discover that maybe 30 or 40% of the way into the big project. I think this is just this is just the nature in any writing project in constructing it." So I just want to end by recommending very sincerely The Republic of Thieves by Scott Lynch, and it's just one in his great series. Now I'm wondering what Kimberly would like to recommend to our listeners.
Well, have you guys read The Marsh King's Daughter by Karen Dion?
No.
Okay. You're in for a wonderful treat. I would highly recommend you get it as soon as possible and devour it, because it's a really, really awesome, fast read. And I've known Karen for many years, and this is really the book of her heart. And it's absolutely fascinating. It's really, I don't want to ruin the story, but, like, just to give you a bit of background to it, it's actually, ironically, a little bit about a kidnapping, but a father, this gentleman kidnaps a young girl, like 14, 15, and then has a child in captivity. And they live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So you learn a lot about what life is like there with no, running water, no electricity. And it's just a fascinating tale. I don't want to say too much more because how about this? Money back guarantee if you don't love it.
Okay. And the author's name again is Karen
Dion, Dionne. If you look it up online, you'll see rave reviews about it. And I'm really glad that you haven't heard about it, because there's nothing better than being told about something that's amazing that you haven't discovered yet, right? It's like you get excited about the treat.
Definitely.
Yes, I'll definitely look forward to that. And I am a little bit familiar with the UP, so that will be of great interest.
Okay, yeah.
Interest. Well,
I learned a lot.
Well, I'm so anxious to read Skyjack, but I know I'm going to have to wait a little while. But here's another challenging series for our listeners to consider. My recommendation is a book by another thriller writer, David Baldacci, called The Escape. And I thought about why I really loved this book. Well, it's part of a series featuring John Puller, who's an expert investigator of military crimes. So it's got the military background covered. It's also a great, impossible prison break story. The prison in question is the most secure military prison at Fort Leavenworth, but I'll keep you in suspense by not telling you who escapes and how. And especially unusual for a thriller, it has a deeply emotional side because there's a challenging family dynamic between the protagonist, John Puller, his genius brother, Robert, and their father, who's a retired general who's in a care center suffering from Alzheimer's. Add to the mix a strong, smart female protagonist, Veronica Knox, who's another investigator. Blend in a series of twists with some really bad players driven by the need for power, and you have one very engaging book that will keep you turning pages. Associated Press called this one Baldacci's best book to date. Well, it's time to wrap up now, and our special thanks go out to thriller writer Kimberly Howe for joining us today. We thank you so much, and we're looking forward to many more Thea Paris adventures from you. And who knows, perhaps even a film of the Freedom Broker someday. I could completely see this on the big screen, Kimberly.
Yeah, I would like to see Riff on the big screen.
I bet you would.
I knew that was coming.
Wendy, who's going to play him? Who's your choice to play Riff then?
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. I got to think about that, Kimberly. Let's talk about that.
So many choices, right? It's hard to narrow it down.
Well, and it's so enjoyable to think about the different choices too. I want to take my time.
True. Savor each option, yes. Yes. Well, what's next for Kendall and Cooper? We'll be interviewing the delightful Steph Cha on her noir fiction series, followed by a traditional mystery writer and a legal mystery series set in Alaska. So keep reading and keep writing. Thanks again.